Welcome everybody. This is Ballroom A, the 245 session. If you've been paying attention to Python packaging recently, this talk does not need an introduction, but I am here to do that anyway. This is Hatch, the only tool you need, by Ofek Lev.
Thanks. All right, okay, next. Hey everybody, my name is Ofek. Currently I work at Datadog, doing developer experience for our engineers that work on the agent. I've been interested in Python and specifically packaging for a number of years now. I've written a few peps, but most of you know me from my efforts on Hatch and that ecosystem. Next slide. So Hatch is a project manager, similar to Cargo or NPM or Yarn. It's sort of the central tool that you would use if you're developing on Python. I started a while back in 2017, but very quickly I had to kind of take a hiatus for two reasons. One, it was just a bit too early. There was a lot of stuff, especially in packaging, that was still being standardized, and I knew whatever I did, I would have to rewrite anyway soon, so that didn't sound fun. And also, it was very much based on my current workflow at the time, which evolved, and it was a bit restrictive. So it took about 2 years to rewrite, at which point it was inducted into the PyPA, and then, yeah, that's where we are now. There are two main differences, I guess, to note. One is that the project was split in two. So it's hatching the build backend and the hatch to CLI, which is like Cargo NPM part. And most features are plugin based, which reduces like my maintenance efforts and also allows folks to do whatever you want. My main priorities are UX, so making everything just very easy with good defaults, and also the standards that packaging puts forth. Next. So the first big user, I think, right after it was released, version 1 was Project Jupyter. All their extensions now are based on the Hatchling plugin. The official tutorial for packaging defaults to Hatchling just because it's very easy to use and has good defaults for newcomers. VS Code, I think last month, actually, announced support for Hatch environments built in. And there are lots of users, not just these projects, but across companies and academia and governments. Next. So you install Hatch a few ways, either PyPI, if you already have Python, or via your distribution, so Homebrew or Wisconda. I would recommend, though, the installers. So there's a MSI and PKG for macOS and Windows, or there are binaries for every platform. This I recommend because it has a built-in way to do updates and some other nice features. Next. So you can make a new project. So, like, here's how you would make a project with the command line interface. Or you can migrate, and we have built-in for support for migrating setuptools projects. It's not perfect, but it would migrate over most config. Next. So, first part of the talk it'll be about Hatchling, and I'll talk a bit about Hatch. I haven't trapped you in a packaging talk, don't worry. So this is what you would do now if you use Hatchling or other build backends. All metadata, for the most part, is static. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the dependencies are one of the peps I wrote, pep 631. The alternative format was like one based on poetry. Next slide. So here's a real example that's pretty common. Say you have a project under a source directory called foo. The old way with setuptools, you would import a function, define the packages, then do kind of like an empty string magic to make it work, then have it recognize non-Python files, and not just for your wheels, then for your source distributions on the right-hand side there, it has its own custom format and like patterns, which is kind of hard and a bit confusing for users. Next. So for hatchling, everything's unambiguous. There's a section for every build target, so wheel and sdist in that case. Patterns use get style globs, so everyone is used to that format. It respects your version control, ignore files for either Git or Mercurial. So it often just works out of the box. And Python files and such aren't special. It's just like a regular build system. And it tries to have really good defaults. So on the side there, in most cases, you wouldn't even need that config, because that would be basically your defaults. It would work out of the box. Next. So build targets. There are 3 that are built in. So wheel and sdist, we mentioned. There's also one for binaries, which is what Hatch itself uses to have like self-bootstrapping binaries. And then there are lots of plugins, like for publishing Lambda functions or whatever. So Hatch, right here, you could replace like any builder that you currently have. Next. One thing that is pretty cool, metadata hooks. So if you remember from setup.py, you can do kind of dynamic stuff, whatever you want in Python code. Same way here. So on the right-hand side, you can have this in your repo. It's a reading environment variable, which has JSON, and you would set that to your dependencies of your library. There are lots of existing plugins, for example, to influence the way PyPI renders your project, to get depth from that requirements txt format, and a bunch of other stuff. Next. Then there are build hooks. So on the right-hand side, again, I try to make the API pretty simple. This indicates on source distributions, you would create a file and then ship that file. And there are lots of plugins that work out of the box. So one's for CMake, that's a relatively new one. You can build Python extensions, or you can utilize your type hints and compile your code with MyPyC, and a bunch of other ones that I don't maintain, but they exist as well. Next. And versioneer. There are plugins not just for the source, like from your version control, like Git, but also for the scheme. So say you're using Semver or calendar versioning. And also, if your source supports it, you can bump it on the command line. So this would replace tools like versioneer or bump to version, stuff like that. Next. And finally, you can publish as well. So you can replace twine or the GitHub action, which kind of wraps twine. By default, it publishes to a PyPI, but you can do whatever you want. It's just a standardized interface. Next. So environments. From now on, everything is like not just for libraries, but also for applications. It applies to everything. So environments are kind of the main feature of Hatch. It allows you to give it like a set of dependencies, and then you can do whatever you want within that kind of workspace. It's a bit different than if you use talks or knocks, in that world, an environment is more like an app that runs like one command. But as I mentioned in Hatchland, it's just a space where you can do arbitrary stuff. And there's plugins. So by default, it's virtual environments, but there are ones based on Conda and ones for Docker, which I maintain, actually. And I do recommend putting that in the hatch.toml. A lot of definitions can be quite long, and you don't want like 1,000 lines in PyProject, usually. Next. So before I show you how to configure them, I'll show you what they do first. So there are two main ways to interface with environments. One is entering a shell, essentially. So you see here, you do rich Python, you see the path, you enter it, and your prompt changes, and now everything is updated to reflect your environment. Next. The other way is the same deal, but without actually entering the environment. You can send commands to that specific environment. Next. So here's a few of the main options. You can set the Python version to whatever you want. If it doesn't exist on your system, Hatch will download it for you at the point in time. Deps, say you're not doing a project, like more of an app, you can find dependencies here rather than like in your project config. If you are using a library, or your repo is a library, features correspond to optional dependencies in PyProject. You can select from them. Dev mode is what we call editable installs. Like if you think of pip, the -e flag, you can disable that. You can set platforms. And if you're running on one that's not supported, it will provide like a nice error message for you. And you can set environment variables, for example. Every type of environment has its own options, though. So for virtual environments, there are more options, like just for that. For example, you can enable UV, which makes resolution and creation a lot faster using UV. Next. Scripts are sort of the bread and butter of Hatch and environments. It's essentially just a series of shell scripts that are how you encode your workflow. And they have like recursion and nesting. So let's go next. You look at an example. Next slide. So here, we run foo. It prints out foo. We run bar. It prints out foo bar, because that foo references that first script. We can print, and it will print out foo bar, and then echo whatever you print on the command line. The args there on the right-hand side is an example of a context formatting. There are a lot more options, but that one references whatever you type on the command line. And then in the last example, if you prefix commands by a hyphen, it ignores the exit code, similar to make. Two things to note here. One is that by default, if you run a command, it will send it to the default environment, but you can prefix the first argument with the environment name. So here, the last three commands are sending that to the test environment. And then also, if it ends up running one show command, it just does it. But if it's two or more, to reduce ambiguity, it prints out like a little context on the left, command 1, 2, or command 1, 2, 3. Next. Then there are matrices, similar to what you might have seen in talks. So just an array of tables. And every key in there, we call a variable. And so they're generated by assembling the product of each combination. So that table on the left, or a series of tables on the left, it generates those 8 environments as seen on the right-hand side. And then naming, there are some options with how you can output the name as well, if you want to alter that. Next. If you send a command to an environment that defines a matrix, it will, by default, run in every environment. So here is an example of printing out the path to every Python in that matrix. There are options to filter as well. So say you want a variable, say you want to influence the Python and run only on Python 3.10, you could do that. Or there's lots of other more complex filtering options. Next. You can also override, which has sort of a tricky syntax, but once you get used to it, it's quite easy. So it's very powerful. So here are some examples. Say you have a matrix, and then inside your matrix, there's a variable version, and you want that to be an environment variable inside that environment. That would be how you do it, setting that product version variable to the matrix variable. Let's say you're on Windows, and you want to change the run script, or add a run script, rather than just change it. You could do it that way. Say you're running in CI, and you don't want to do editable installs, which is a good practice. You could do it that way. There's also a way to just match on the raw name using a regex. Next. There's also a way to test. So I introduced this about a month ago, I guess. So testing is backed by PyTest and a few plugins that I've chosen as pretty good defaults. So things like running on every core to make them parallel, introducing retries, and there's also a way to check coverage using coverage py, as everyone uses. It's very configurable too. So say you might not want to use PyTest for some reason, you can if you want. And it should work for most projects out of the box. So here's an example of just cloning the Ginger repo, Ginger2, adding a bit of config, and just running it, and it just works. It tests on all the Python versions there. Next. There's also a way to do static analysis backed by rough using the format command, fmt. By default, Hatch ships with a bunch of rules selected. I've kind of went down every one and selected the ones that seem appropriate for most projects. It took a while because there are like hundreds of rules, but I think it has pretty good defaults now. The ones that aren't selected are either buggy and they're open issues, or they conflict with the formatter, or maybe MyPy, or just they're too restrictive and wouldn't be great for most users. I view this as very useful for my own projects and at work, because it kind of frees up your mental overhead for knowing what rules are and what is the current best practices, and just lets you kind of outsource that logic to a different tool. So it's guaranteed to be good defaults forever. But you can either add on your own stuff to do overrides, or just not do any hatch settings and provide entirely your config based on what your org wants. Next. You can also manage Python, so replacing tools like pyenv, or even if you want to not use Homebrew Pythons. So it's easy as installing here. There's an example of installing 3.12 and PyPy 3.10. So right now only CPython and PyPy are supported, but you can install them, you'll add them to your path, and then you can start using them. This is mostly good for external tools to use, because as I mentioned, inside environments, it will download it for your at runtime. But this is good for if you want to set up your system in a certain way. And next. Also, another pip I wrote that got standardized. You can, inside Python scripts, you can define certain metadata. So right now the metadata is the Python version range that your script requires, and then certain dependencies. And if you point hatch run at the script, it will run it and manage the environment for you. Next. And those are main features right now. In the future, which is like actually probably next week, I'm going to work on workspaces. So this is good in the case of monorepos. We have lots of projects that depend on one another and have different release cycles. After that, I'm going to do commands to manage deps. I thought that was blocked on lock files, but it's kind of a different concept, so I'm adding them first. Then I'm going to do a bit of performance improvements for the CLI and hatchling. I'm going to increase basically type inting and then compile with my PyC. Then the hatch binaries, I'm planning on signing sometime in the summer. I'm waiting on a service that Azure has that is in beta right now. And then lock files, which I haven't implemented yet because I'm waiting on that becoming standardized. And Brett Cannon is essentially the one doing that currently. So waiting on that. These are just like what's coming up next, but there are other stuff, like a contributor just opened a PR, I think 2 weeks ago, to refactor the config system to use Pydantic, so that might come next as well. Next. And that is it, yeah, thanks.
We have 7 or 8 minutes for questions. There's a microphone in this aisle and one on that side of the room, if anybody has questions.
That was too loud. With Hatch, is it possible, if you've, I so noticed there's a couple different environments, you were able to, set up different ones for like development and for testing separately. Is there a way to define commonly used imports across multiple environments? Like if your project is basically being wrapped around like a library or something like that, without needing to define that one library is a dependent across all of the environments, is there a way to just set that as like a common dependency?
So if your project has multiple projects in the same repo, is that what you mean?
No, something more like if your library is based on like you're using requests and part of like your testing suite would include using requests as well, but like the development doesn't need PyTest, right? The development environment doesn't need PyTest, just the testing part needs PyTest. Is there a way to just set up in one spot, I want requests in every environment?
Yeah, with inheritance, you could do that. You could have base environments that have certain depths, and then every child environment would inherit from that. You can add them down the chain too, add extra stuff.
Okay, I didn't realize environments had inheritance. That's really cool. That answers that question. Thank you.
Hey, I was wondering how Hatch handles private GitHub requirements. I have projects that install from private repos, and if Hatch is capable of doing that.
Yeah, Hatch under the hood sort of outsources to other tools for package installation. So either, for virtual environments, either pip would be used or UV if you enable that. So whatever they would support and how you would define dependencies, it would just use those tools. So yeah, it should be supported.
Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question for, can Hatch manage multiple projects at the same time? It's very common, at least in my developer workflow, to have project A that depends on project B, and I'm making changes on project A, and I want to see their impacts on project B. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that feature will be called workspaces. And yeah, I'll be working on that. I'll start next week, actually. So,
oh, thank you very much.
Not
Looking forward
yet,
for
not
it.
yet, but almost there.
Thank you.
Hey, I've got a question. What would you do if you needed to manage both the back end and front end? Is it possible to manage like React or something like that alongside of Python, a Python backend, or is that planned maybe?
Well, I mean, environments are sort of agnostic. So you can use it as just a task runner, which I do in a few projects. So you can have scripts to do JavaScript stuff or C# stuff,
Okay.
and it doesn't have to be in Python. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds like a good application or good use for one of my work projects. So
Nice.
thank you.
Hi. Do you have any thoughts about how to get Hatch to work well in restricted environments where installing from the normal locations for PyPI or for the CPython builds isn't feasible?
Installing Hatch itself.
Not for installing Hatch, but for having Hatch's features in terms of managing like CPython distributions or
I see.
managing other installs using like
Yeah.
custom locations for PyPI and CPython.
Yeah, so for the Python distribution management, there's a PR from a contributor to add support for arbitrary sources, but I haven't had time to review that yet. But yeah, that would be a feature coming. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Hi. If I have a project that is not really the sort of thing you would upload to PyPI, but I do want to manage, like it's a website, static site generator sort of thing, where mostly it's something that's not Python, but I need to have a couple of dependencies, maybe like one Python script. Is Hatch suitable for that? Can I use hatch.toml without pyproject.toml for that or something?
Yeah, I think that feature I showed toward the end, that pep that I wrote, where you can define your deps in a standalone script, I think would match our use case. So you can have like a directory of one-off scripts, and each one would define its own deps and then Python version, and that might be what you're looking for. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's give Ofek a hand.